It was a hot summer afternoon when the billionaire James Walker found himself in a tight spot. His wife's daughter, Emily, had been giving their nannies a hard time since the day they moved into the mansion. The luxury estate where Emily lived, surrounded by pristine gardens and floor-to-ceiling glass windows, seemed like the perfect setting for a peaceful life. But Emily, a 9-year-old girl, wasn't easy to handle. Since her mother married James, she'd become a reclusive, rebellious child. No nanny had been able to manage her so far. Every nanny James hired couldn't deal with Emily's attitude. With the comforts of her life, she had become bored and rebellious, rejecting any form of discipline. She would mock the nannies, stir chaos during meals, and lock herself in her room whenever anyone tried to get close. It was always the same. The nannies started with hope, but within days, they collapsed under the weight of her demands. No one lasted long. After the latest nanny quit in frustration, James was running out of options. He needed to do something drastic. That's when he looked at his chauffeur's son, Lucas. Lucas had always been polite, calm, and understanding, but James had never thought of him for such a responsibility. He was used to being the boss, and Lucas, at 19, had always been part of the team, not someone to handle his daughter. "Lucas," James said, his frustration evident. "My daughter needs someone who can calm her down, someone who understands her. Are you willing to give it a try?" Lucas was taken aback by the request, but knew he couldn't refuse. He understood that with Emily it would be tough, but he was ready to give his best. He didn't want to disappoint James, but more importantly, he knew that Emily needed someone who would be patient, who wouldn't be easily intimidated or too strict. When Lucas entered the vast hall of the mansion, where Emily was sitting in an armchair, her eyes glued to her phone and clearly uninterested, he didn't know what to expect. She glanced up at him for a moment, furrowing her brow, before returning her attention to the screen. "Hello, Emily," Lucas said, offering a friendly smile. "I need you to show me what you like to do." "What do you like to do for fun?" Emily didn't respond. She just looked at him, making a dismissive sound, and turned away, ignoring him completely. Lucas wasn't intimidated. He knew that trying to win her over immediately wasn't going to work. That would take time. He realized that the secret was to be patient and genuine. Lucas's first attempt to interact with Emily was a failure. When he tried to help her with her homework, Emily threw a tantrum. "I don't need help. You don't tell me what to do," she screamed, pushing the notebook away. She was frustrated, as if she were expecting Lucas to react with anger or frustration, just like all the others before him. But Lucas, keeping his calm, backed off a bit, not rushing to force the interaction. "That's fine, Emily. You don't need help right now, but if you change your mind, I'm here." Emily looked at him skeptically, unsure of how to respond. To her, this behavior was completely different from what she had known. But Lucas didn't waver. He didn't try to be strict or make empty promises. He was just there, available, without pressuring her. The next evening, Emily refused to join Lucas for dinner, and instead of complaining or insisting, he simply retreated to the living room and left her alone. The night was cold, and by coincidence, she appeared in the room, looking a bit calmer than before. Lucas, who was watching a movie, looked at her and motioned with his hand. "You can sit here if you want." "I'm just watching something to pass the time." To his surprise, she sat next to him. There was no rush in her movement, just a subtle curiosity. Without forcing conversation, Lucas continued watching the movie. Slowly, Emily started to open up. She made a few comments about the film, and Lucas responded with genuine interest, without pushing her to get involved. They spent the night together, watching a movie and eating pizza, simple, pressure-free. From that moment on, something changed. Emily began to trust Lucas in a way no one else had been able to. He didn't try to force a friendship, nor did he become authoritarian. Instead, he became a steady, reliable presence in her life, someone she knew she could count on. At first, she tested him, provoking him, as if to challenge his boundaries, but Lucas didn't give in. He was patient, firm in his kindness, and Emily began to understand that he truly didn't want to control her. He just wanted to guide her gently. Days turned into weeks, and the relationship between Lucas and Emily grew stronger. The billionaire, James, watched from a distance, surprised to see his daughter, who had rejected every nanny, now getting along with the chauffeur's son. He couldn't believe that Lucas, a young man without money or a title, had done what no one else had been able to, earned Emily's trust. One day, James approached Lucas with a thoughtful expression. "I don't know how you did it, but I thank you. You've done what no one else could. You've changed the dynamic in our house." Lucas smiled modestly, knowing he had found a way to help Emily that no one else had considered, by being genuine, patient, and offering his friendship without any pressures. "I think Emily just needed someone who would treat her like a person, not a project." James nodded, realizing that his daughter, despite her wealth, only needed a little compassion. Lucas, with his humility, had done the impossible. The days following Lucas's success were filled with a new kind of harmony in the Walker household. Emily, who had once been rebellious and hard to manage, now began to show small signs of change. She still had her moments, but the tantrums were fewer, and there was a noticeable shift in her behavior. She started to ask Lucas for help on homework, not out of obligation, but because she felt comfortable with him. The household, once dominated by tension, felt more peaceful. James watched in awe as his daughter began to show respect for Lucas, something he hadn't seen from her in years. The truth was, James had never considered Lucas as more than a driver's son, someone who was part of his team, but not someone who could have an impact on his personal life. But now, Lucas had done something that James couldn't. He had reached Emily in ways no one else had. One evening, while Emily was out playing in the garden, James and Lucas sat on the terrace, watching the sunset. The billionaire turned to Lucas, his voice more genuine than usual. "Lucas," James began, "I've been thinking a lot about everything that's happened. You've done something incredible with Emily. I never thought anyone could get through to her." Lucas smiled, a little uncomfortable with the praise, but he appreciated it. "I'm just doing what I can, Mr. Walker. She just needed a bit of time and patience. Sometimes people just need to be heard." James nodded, a hint of regret in his eyes. "I've spent so much time focused on building this empire, I didn't realize how much I was missing in my relationship with her. I thought the money and the luxuries would be enough, but I see now that it wasn't. It was never about what we had, but how we connected." Lucas looked at him with a quiet understanding. "It's never about the things you give them. It's about being there when they need you. And not just as a parent, but as a person." James let the words sink in. He had spent so many years thinking that his success in business was the most important thing he could offer. But now, he saw that the true wealth he could offer was the time, attention, and care that he'd been missing. It wasn't about money. It was about connection. As the weeks turned into months, James found himself spending more time with his family. He started taking Emily out for walks, just the two of them. He asked her about her day, about her thoughts on school, on life, on the future. He realized that for all her rebelliousness, Emily had a sharp mind, full of potential and ideas. The only thing that had held her back was his absence. It wasn't just Emily who had changed. James himself was undergoing a transformation. He found himself less interested in the endless meetings and calls about his businesses. Instead, he began focusing on what really mattered. He started showing up at charity events, using his influence and resources to help communities in need. But this time, he wasn't doing it for the accolades or the business deals. He was doing it because he wanted to leave a legacy that truly mattered. Lucas, too, had begun to shine. As he spent more time with Emily, guiding her through her ups and downs, he grew into a quiet leader in the household. His humility and patience had earned him the respect of everyone around him, including James, who began to see Lucas not just as the chauffeur's son, but as someone with the potential to do great things in the world. One day, as Lucas was leaving work, James stopped him in the hallway. "Lucas, I want you to know that I appreciate everything you've done for us. You've been more of a father figure to Emily than I've been. And for that, I'll always be grateful." Lucas, caught off guard, paused for a moment before replying. "I'm just trying to help, Mr. Walker. You're a good father, just maybe not in the ways you think. Sometimes it's not about being there physically, it's about showing up emotionally. And that's what makes all the difference." James stood still for a moment, processing Lucas's words. He realized that Lucas was right. It wasn't too late to change, to reconnect, to be the father that Emily needed him to be. For so long, he had been distant, thinking that providing for her was enough. But now he understood that the real gift he could give was his time, his presence, and his love. As the seasons changed, So did the dynamic in the Walker household. Emily continued to grow into a strong, independent young woman, now with a much deeper understanding of who she was and what she could accomplish. And Lucas, with his unwavering support and gentle guidance, had become a pillar in her life, someone she could always count on. James, now fully aware of the importance of emotional connection, worked to strengthen his bond with Emily, making sure she knew how much she mattered. He wasn't perfect, but he was trying. He began to show up for the moments that mattered, whether it was attending Emily's school events or simply spending time with her on the weekends. He realized that the true measure of success wasn't in how much money he made or how many businesses he ran, but in the relationships he had built and the ones he was still building. Lucas's role in the family had also evolved. He wasn't just the chauffeur's son anymore. He was a part of the family, a trusted advisor, and a role model for Emily. The Walker household had transformed into a place of warmth, understanding, and genuine connection. The tension that once plagued their lives had melted away, replaced by a deep sense of trust and respect. And as James looked at Emily and Lucas, he knew that the greatest legacy he could leave wasn't in the wealth he had accumulated, but in the lessons he had learned. It was in the love, the care, and the compassion he had finally embraced. The impossible had happened. Lucas, the chauffeur's son, had done what no one else could. He had healed the rift between James and Emily, not through force or authority, but through patience, kindness, and love. And in doing so, he had changed their lives forever. As time passed, the transformation in the Walker household became more apparent to everyone who visited. The once tense and distant mansion now echoed with laughter, conversation, and genuine warmth. The changes weren't just visible in the way James interacted with Emily, but in the atmosphere of the entire family. They were no longer just a wealthy family living in isolation. They were a family that truly understood the meaning of connection. James, once consumed by his empire and distant from his daughter, now made her well-being a top priority. He realized that all the power and wealth he had accumulated over the years meant nothing if he didn't have a meaningful relationship with his daughter. He spent weekends going hiking with Emily, learning about her dreams, and attending every school event he could. They began to develop a deep bond, one that had been missing for far too long. Lucas, on the other hand, continued to play a vital role in the household. He had become a mentor not only to Emily, but to the entire family. His humility, kindness, and genuine nature had earned him a place not just as an employee, but as a trusted member of the family. Over time, James came to rely on Lucas's advice, valuing his perspective more than he had ever expected. Lucas wasn't just a reflection of his upbringing. He was a living example of resilience, patience, and wisdom. One evening, James invited Lucas to dinner, wanting to express his appreciation for everything he had done. As they sat together at the table, James looked across at Lucas, a newfound respect in his eyes. "Lucas, I don't think I've ever truly thanked you for everything you've done for Emily and for our family," James said, his voice sincere. "You've not only changed the way I see my daughter, but you've changed the way I see the world. I've been living in a bubble for so long, focused on wealth and business, that I forgot what really mattered." Lucas smiled humbly, though he knew this moment had been a long time coming. "I didn't do anything extraordinary, Mr. Walker. I just did what I thought was right." James shook his head. "What you did was extraordinary. You showed us what it means to love without expecting anything in return, to be patient and compassionate even when it's hard. You gave Emily the space to open up and trust again, and in doing so, you gave me the greatest gift I could ever ask for." That night, as James reflected on the conversation, he felt a profound sense of gratitude. He had spent so many years chasing external achievements, wealth, power, success, and now he understood that the true measure of success was the connections he had built, the love he had nurtured, and the legacy he was leaving for his children. Emily, too, had changed. No longer the rebellious, distant girl she once was, she had grown into a thoughtful, confident young woman. Her relationship with her father had blossomed, and her relationship with Lucas had become one of mutual respect. She had learned the power of patience and understanding, not just from Lucas, but from seeing her father's own transformation. With Lucas's quiet influence, Emily had also begun to take an active role in helping those less fortunate. She started volunteering at local shelters and organizing community outreach programs. Inspired by the lessons she had learned from both Lucas and her father, Emily understood that wealth wasn't something to hoard. It was a tool to make a difference. One afternoon, while they were working on a new community project together, Emily turned to Lucas and said, "I never realized before how much we can do for others. I've always had everything I could want, but it's the people we help that make us truly rich, isn't it?" Lucas smiled warmly, proud of the young woman Emily had become. Exactly. Giving is where the real wealth is. The community project they were working on, a youth mentorship program, became a success, with many local teens coming to find guidance and support. Emily was leading the charge, but Lucas was right there with her, helping to guide them through the process. It was clear that the legacy they were building wasn't just for themselves, it was for the future. As the months passed, James found himself involved in more initiatives, ones that focused on long-term community building, education, and mental health, causes he had never considered before. He used his business acumen not just to expand his empire, but to invest in ways that would create lasting change. He understood now that the real business of life was about investing in people, not just products. The Walkers, once a family divided by wealth and power, were now united by purpose. Their wealth had become a tool to do good, and they had found a new definition of success, one that went beyond material gains and instead focused on how much they could give, how much they could change, and how much they could help others. They had finally discovered the true meaning of family. As for Lucas, he never expected to become such an integral part of their lives. He had simply followed his instincts, helping Emily when no one else could, and in doing so, had changed the course of their futures. He had become more than just a chauffeur's son. He had become a brother, a mentor, and a friend to the Walkers, and in the process, he had created a legacy of his own, one rooted in selflessness, compassion, and quiet strength. One evening, as they all sat together in the living room laughing and sharing stories, James looked around at his family and felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had everything he could ever want, but it wasn't the money or the properties that mattered anymore. It was the love in the room, the sense of connection, and the knowledge that together, they were doing something truly meaningful. As he looked at Emily, Lucas, and his wife, he realized that they had all helped each other become the best versions of themselves. He had finally found the purpose he had been searching for, not in the business world, but in the hearts of the people he loved. And in that moment, he understood that the impossible had happened. A simple act of kindness from a young man had changed everything for him, his family, and their entire community. The lesson was clear. True wealth comes not from what you accumulate, but from what you give away. As the months continued to pass, the Walker family found a new rhythm, one grounded in purpose and mutual respect. James had transformed into a man who valued time, connection, and legacy above all else. No longer consumed by the chase for wealth or success, he dedicated himself to shaping a future where his family could thrive together, giving back to the community that had shaped their lives in ways they never imagined. Emily, now a young woman with a passion for helping others, had blossomed into a natural leader. She spent her days working on various outreach programs, from helping underprivileged children with their education to advocating for mental health awareness. Her heart, once guarded and distant, now brimmed with empathy. She had learned from both her father and Lucas that wealth wasn't just a tool to amass more, it was a responsibility to make the world a better place. Lucas, though still humble and quiet, had found his place within the family. He had never sought recognition, but his actions had spoken louder than words ever could. He became Emily's partner in leading community initiatives, his ability to connect with people, and his calm demeanor making him an invaluable resource. He didn't need a title or accolades. His true success was seen in the lives he had impacted, in the trust he had built with the people around him. The project they had started together, a mentorship program for at-risk youth, had grown into something much larger than they had anticipated. It had started as a small, local initiative, but with the help of James's network and resources, it soon expanded. They were able to bring in mentors from all walks of life, entrepreneurs, educators, social workers, and even artists. The program was designed not just to guide the youths academically, but to help them develop emotionally, teaching them life skills that would empower them to shape their own futures. One day, as James stood at the front of the room during a fundraising event for the mentorship program, he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. He had never imagined that his life would take this turn, that the young man who had once been an employee in his house would now be standing beside him, working as an equal. As the room filled with supporters, James reflected on how much had changed since Lucas first arrived at the mansion. What started as an impossible situation had turned into an inspiring success. "I never thought I would be here," James said into the microphone, his voice filled with emotion. "But here we are, together, doing something that truly matters. I've learned that it's not about what we have, but what we give. And Lucas, you've shown me that in ways I'll never be able to repay." Lucas, sitting quietly in the audience, exchanged a look with Emily. He had always been content behind the scenes, never wanting to draw attention to himself. But as he watched James speak, he realized that this moment was about more than just the success of the program. It was about the change that had taken place in their lives. The trust, the growth, and the bond that had been formed through shared purpose. After the event, as the crowd dispersed and the evening wound down, James and Lucas stood together on the balcony, overlooking the city. The night was quiet, the stars shining brightly above them. "You've done something incredible, Lucas," James said, his voice soft but filled with gratitude. "I never would have guessed that you'd be the one to show me what truly matters. You've not only changed Emily's life, but mine as well." Lucas looked out at the skyline, his expression thoughtful. "I didn't do it for you, Mr. Walker. I did it because it was the right thing to do. And you taught me that too." James smiled, a deep sense of peace washing over him. He had spent his life chasing after the wrong things. Now, standing beside Lucas, he understood that the real rewards weren't in the bank account, the accolades, or the power. They were in the lives he had touched, the people he had helped, and the relationships he had rebuilt, especially the one with his daughter. As the two of them stood there, a quiet understanding passed between them. Lucas had done the impossible, not by any grand gesture, but by being true to himself, by showing up with consistency and kindness. And through his actions, he had not only saved Emily, but had helped James rediscover the man he had lost along the way. It was then that James realized his greatest success wasn't in the empire he had built, but in the legacy he was now leaving. The true measure of his wealth wasn't in material possessions. It was in the love and respect he had cultivated with his family, in the change they were making in the world, and in the lessons they had learned together. As the night grew darker, James turned to Lucas with a smile. "What now?" Lucas, ever the humble figure, simply replied, "Now, we keep building. Together." And with that, the Walkers and Lucas continued to shape their future, not just as individuals, but as a united family, ready to face whatever challenges came next with the same determination and love that had carried them so far. As the months turned into years, the Walker family's bond only strengthened, and the impact of their work rippled through the community, touching more lives than they had ever imagined. The mentorship program grew exponentially, reaching cities across the country. Emily, now in her early 20s, had become a well-respected advocate for youth empowerment. She had surpassed all expectations, earning accolades from community leaders and making a tangible difference in the lives of countless young people who had once felt overlooked. Lucas, while still content with his humble demeanor, had become an integral part of the program's operations. He was not just a mentor, but a leader, someone who taught young people the power of empathy, patience, and perseverance. What set him apart wasn't his title or his wealth, but his ability to connect with people on a personal level. He didn't see them as projects to fix, but as individuals capable of greatness. And that was something that spoke volumes to the young minds he mentored. The Walker Mansion, once a cold, imposing structure that reflected James's wealth and status, had become a home filled with warmth, love, and purpose. James had opened the doors to not only his family, but also to the community, inviting those in need into his life. He hosted dinners for local leaders, organized charity events, and made sure that his wealth wasn't something that separated him from the world, but something that could bring about real change. One evening, as James sat in his office, reflecting on the path his life had taken, Emily walked in, her face lit up with excitement. She had just returned from a meeting with a major education reform organization where she had been invited to speak as a young leader in the field. "Dad, you won't believe the conversation I had today," she exclaimed, practically glowing with excitement. They want me to be part of a nationwide initiative to bring mentorship programs to schools across the country. It's a huge opportunity, and it's all because of what we've started here." James leaned back in his chair, pride swelling in his chest. He had never imagined that his daughter, once so distant and hard to reach, would one day be at the forefront of a national movement. But here she was, about to make an even bigger impact than he ever could have. "I'm so proud of you, Emily," James said, his voice full of emotion. "You've done more than I ever could have hoped for. You've taken the foundation and made it yours, and you're changing the world." Emily smiled, her eyes bright. "I couldn't have done any of this without you, Dad. You've always been there for me, even when I didn't realize it. And Lucas, he's been a mentor to me in ways I never expected." James nodded, his gaze drifting toward the window. He thought about how much had changed in their lives since Lucas had first entered the picture. It wasn't just about what Lucas had done for Emily or what he had done for the program. It was about how Lucas had helped James see what truly mattered. He had shown him that leadership wasn't about control. It was about guiding others with respect and creating an environment where everyone could thrive. That night, as James, Emily, and Lucas sat together at dinner, discussing the future of the program and their plans for the upcoming year, James realized that this was the family he had always dreamed of, even if it hadn't come together in the way he had expected. It wasn't just about the wealth or the power. It was about love, commitment, and the drive to make the world a better place. Over time, the mentorship program continued to flourish, reaching more and more young people every year. Lucas became a sought-after speaker at national conferences, sharing his story of transformation and his belief in the power of empathy. Emily, with her leadership skills and passion for helping others, became a role model for young women everywhere, showing them that they didn't have to be defined by their circumstances. James's own life had come full circle. He had started as a man driven by the need for success, but now he was driven by the desire to give back, to leave behind a legacy of love and impact. He spent less time on business deals and more time on the things that truly mattered: his family, his community, and the future they were building together. One evening, as James stood on the balcony overlooking the city, watching the sun set behind the skyline, he felt a deep sense of peace. The life he had built, once centered on wealth and power, was now centered on something far more meaningful: connection. He looked over at Emily and Lucas, who were deep in conversation about the latest developments in the program. They were the future, the ones who would carry the torch forward. And as he stood there watching them, James realized that his greatest achievement was not the empire he had built. It was the family he had formed, the relationships he had nurtured, and the positive change they had all created together. In that moment, James understood something profound. The true measure of a man's success is not what he builds for himself, but what he leaves behind for others. The love, the lessons, and the legacy that would continue to inspire long after he was gone. As the night fell, James felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. His life had been transformed, not by his wealth, but by the people he had chosen to surround himself with, by the love they had shared and the difference they had made in the world. And for the first time, he knew that he had truly found what he had been searching for all along. As time continued to unfold, the Walker family remained as united as ever. Their focus had shifted from the pursuit of external success to the cultivation of inner fulfillment, something they had all been searching for in their own way. What once seemed like an impossible journey had transformed into a deeply meaningful and impactful life. James, now far removed from the business world he had once dominated, focused his energy on building sustainable, community-driven initiatives. He spent countless hours meeting with local leaders, brainstorming ways to create lasting change. He also worked closely with Emily, who had now become one of the leading voices for youth empowerment, mentoring and guiding a new generation of young leaders. Lucas, though still the humble and quiet figure he had always been, continued to grow into his role as a leader and mentor. He used his story, his own humble beginnings, his struggles, and the lessons he had learned to inspire others. His approach to leadership was simple but powerful: lead with empathy, listen more than you speak, and always be there for those who need you. One day, as they were gathered in the living room discussing their next community initiative, James looked at Lucas and Emily, both of whom were deeply engrossed in the conversation. He felt a sense of pride in his heart, knowing how far they had come. He remembered the first day Lucas had stepped into their lives, uncertain but willing to help. Now he was part of their family, integral, respected, and essential to the work they were doing together. "I don't think I ever could have imagined this," James said, breaking the silence. "When I first hired you, Lucas, I didn't know what to expect. And Emily, I'm so proud of everything you've achieved. You both have done more for me than I can ever repay." Lucas smiled, the same humble grin he always wore. "It wasn't about repayment, Mr. Walker. We're just doing what we can. You've given us the opportunity to make a real difference. That's all we could ask for." Emily nodded, her expression thoughtful. "It's amazing to think that it all started with a simple decision. If it hadn't been for that moment, when you decided to let Lucas step in, none of this would have happened. We're changing lives now, because you decided to give someone a chance." James felt a lump in his throat, hearing Emily speak so confidently about the impact they were having. He had always known that their lives would mean something, but he never truly understood the depth of that meaning until he saw how much they had transformed their world. "You've both made me realize that success isn't measured in wealth or titles or how much you achieve. It's about the lives you touch. It's about leaving the world better than you found it." As they sat together, each of them reflecting on the impact they were having, it was clear that they had created something extraordinary. Not just a legacy of business success, but a legacy of compassion, leadership, and giving. But there was still more to do. There were still communities to reach, lives to change, and more work to be done. Emily and Lucas had big dreams for the future, and James was committed to supporting them, not as a father trying to control the direction, but as a partner ready to see where their vision would take them. Months passed, and their initiatives expanded beyond what they had originally thought possible. The mentorship programs they had launched now spanned several states, reaching thousands of young people in need of guidance and support. The success of their programs didn't just lie in the numbers, but in the stories of transformation that came from every individual they helped. One evening, while Emily was preparing for another speaking engagement, Lucas approached James, who was sitting quietly in his study, reviewing some reports. "James," Lucas said, "I was thinking, we've come a long way and I know we've achieved a lot, but there's always more we can do. Have you ever thought about taking this beyond the US? Maybe expanding internationally, reaching people in different parts of the world who could benefit from what we're doing here?" James looked up, a sense of excitement building inside him. He had spent years building a business empire, and now, the thought of taking their family's vision global seemed like the next natural step. "You know, Lucas, I've been thinking the same thing," he replied, a smile forming on his face. "Maybe it's time to truly scale what we've created, to spread this message of hope and empowerment even further." And so, the Walker family's mission expanded beyond the borders of their country. They started working with international organizations, helping set up mentorship programs, building schools, and providing access to resources for youth in developing nations. What had started as a local initiative was now a global movement, one that reached across continents and cultures, touching the lives of young people everywhere. Through it all, the bond between James, Emily, and Lucas only grew stronger. They continued to support one another, learning from each other, and growing as a family. They knew there was still much to do, but they also knew that they were no longer chasing after something external. They had found their purpose. They were making the world a better place, one life at a time. As they stood together on the rooftop of their mansion, looking out at the city they had transformed, James turned to Lucas and Emily. "I think we've done it," he said, a satisfied and content smile on his face. "We've built something that will last, something that truly matters. And I couldn't have done it without you two." Emily and Lucas exchanged a look, a silent understanding passing between them. They had all changed in ways they couldn't have imagined. Their journey was far from over, but they had already made an indelible mark on the world. The story of the Walker family was no longer just about a billionaire who built an empire. It was about the people who came together to create a legacy of kindness, empathy, and impact. And that was the kind of wealth that would last for generations. As the years passed, the Walker family's work expanded even further, but so did their personal growth. James, now deeply embedded in the cause, found himself increasingly focused on the legacy he was leaving behind. His empire had shifted from material wealth to something far more valuable, a network of people connected by shared purpose. The Walker Foundation had become an international force for good, touching communities across Africa, Asia, and Latin America, offering educational opportunities, mentorship, and resources to children and young adults who had been overlooked by society. Emily, now a recognized leader in global youth empowerment, had begun advocating at the highest levels of government and education. She worked closely with global organizations, shaping policy and influencing change in the way young people were educated and mentored. Her passion for helping others had transformed into a powerful, far-reaching mission that was inspiring the next generation of young leaders. But amidst the growth and success, the Walkers never lost sight of what truly mattered: the people they were helping and, most importantly, the relationships they had built with each other. Emily had always been close to Lucas, but over time, their bond deepened into something more than just a mentor-mentee relationship. They had become partners in every sense, united by a shared vision for a better world. One day, as Emily and Lucas sat in a cafe, discussing the future of the mentorship program and their plans to expand into even more countries, Emily spoke with a sense of urgency in her voice. "Lucas, I think we've accomplished so much, but there's still so much left to do. We've seen firsthand how this program changes lives, but we need to make sure it doesn't stop here. We need to keep pushing, keep evolving, and bring this message to even more corners of the world. Our vision is bigger than what we've done so far." Lucas nodded, his gaze steady and thoughtful. "I agree. We've touched so many lives already, but we can do more. I think we need to focus on sustainability now. We don't just want to impact people temporarily. We need to empower them to continue the work on their own, long after we've moved on to the next project." Emily smiled. It was a simple thought, but one that captured the essence of everything they had worked for. They weren't just giving people a chance to succeed. They were teaching them how to build their own futures, how to become the leaders of tomorrow. The conversation moved naturally to the next steps in their plan: securing more partnerships, creating local leadership programs, and ensuring the long-term sustainability of their initiatives. It was clear that, as much as they had already accomplished, there was so much more waiting for them. Back at the Walker mansion, James was deeply reflective. Over the years, his perspective on success had completely shifted. He found himself spending more time with Emily, Lucas, and the growing network of young leaders they were cultivating. It had become clear to him that his role was no longer just that of a businessman. He was now a guide, a mentor, and someone who had the resources to ensure that those who were ready for change could receive the help they needed. One evening, as he was reviewing the foundation's progress, he had a quiet moment with Lucas. The two of them sat on the balcony watching the sun set behind the skyline. "You know, Lucas, I've been thinking a lot," James began, his voice thoughtful. "When I first asked you to step in and work with Emily, I didn't know what to expect. But now, looking at everything we've accomplished together, I realize how much I underestimated you. You've not just been a part of this, Lucas. You've been one of its driving forces." Lucas smiled, his usual humility shining through. "I just wanted to help. That's all." James nodded, looking out over the city. "I don't think I truly understood the value of what you brought to this family. It wasn't about being a leader or having all the answers. It was about being present, being patient, and giving people a chance. You've done that for Emily, and for countless others. You've taught me more about leadership than anyone ever could." Lucas didn't respond immediately, but his expression softened. He had always seen his role as simply doing what needed to be done. He never sought the spotlight or recognition. But over time, he had realized that sometimes the most powerful leaders were those who led by example, those who showed others the way without ever demanding anything in return. The months that followed brought even greater success to the Walker Foundation. As Emily and Lucas continued to lead new initiatives, James's role had evolved, not just as a philanthropist, but as a strategic advisor. He focused on ensuring that the foundation's work was sustainable, aligning with local governments and community organizations to foster long-term change. James also spent more time traveling, meeting with young leaders and getting first-hand accounts of how their initiatives were transforming lives. He was humbled by the stories of resilience and hope he encountered along the way. He had once measured his success by the number of businesses he ran, the wealth he accumulated, and the empire he built. But now, he measured it by the lives he had touched, the relationships he had formed, and the future he had helped shape. One evening, After returning from a trip abroad, James gathered his family for dinner. Emily, now well established in her role as a global youth advocate, was sitting across from him, her eyes full of excitement as she shared the latest developments in their international work. Lucas, ever the quiet force, sat beside her, listening intently. James looked at both of them, feeling an overwhelming sense of pride. I don't think I've ever truly expressed this, but I want you to know how proud I am of both of you. You've taken this foundation to places I never imagined. You've made a real difference in the world, and I couldn't be more grateful. Emily smiled and reached across the table to squeeze her father's hand. It's not just us, Dad. It's all of us, together. You've helped build the foundation for all of this. Without you, we wouldn't be where we are. Lucas, with his usual modesty, added, It's not about one person. It's about all of us coming together, believing in something greater than ourselves. That's what makes the difference. James sat back in his chair, reflecting on the truth of their words. He had built an empire, but it was nothing compared to the empire of hearts, minds, and lives they were now shaping together. As the evening went on, James looked at his daughter and the young man who had become a son to him. They had become a family, bound not just by blood, but by purpose. The future was theirs to shape, and they were ready to continue the work they had started. James had found what he had been searching for all along: true success. It wasn't in the millions of dollars or the sprawling mansion. It was in the legacy he was creating with his family and the lasting impact they were making in the world. And as the years continued, they would carry that legacy forward, knowing that what they had created together would live on long after they were gone.